Just as they can use it in the wrong way, they can also exercise political leadership in a way to elevate the dialogue, in a way to promote reconciliation. And I think that option is still available to the government of Sudan. They invited me to go to Sudan. Should I? And we're looking at that. And if I go, we will press that message. That message is being pressed by U.S. negotiators day in and day out. And my short answer to your question is I hope that the information minister's statement is not the final word on the subject. It certainly isn't for us, and we will continue to press it. And we also want to have enough confidence that this is going in the right direction, so that the idea that everyone in the North has got to get back to the South is not is not something that has to happen, because there's enough of a commitment to a peaceful outcome and enough of an agreement on principles that people will not be rendered stateless after the referendum. That's the best answer I can give you.
No, I appreciate it. And I know that you understand the issue thoroughly and how important it is. Let me ask you with regards, you mentioned capacity building a moment ago, and how that is obviously a key concern. In southern Sudan, and I have met with the Catholic bishops there, and I've met with other faith-based individuals, and they get very concerned that they are being bypassed when it comes to allocations of funding, and that includes the government of southern Sudan. They get some, but certainly not enough to really make a difference, and that was as recently as just a few months ago that I had that conversation. And I'm wondering what we're doing to ensure that faith-based organizations who have capability, capacity, volunteers, in PEPFAR we have discovered beyond any reasonable doubt that if you overlook faith-based organizations, as the Global Fund has done, sadly, particularly at the community coordinating mechanism level, it's like, it's cutting off your nose to spite your face. You have a capability there. Why aren't you utilizing it? And I'm wondering if FBOs are fully integrated into mission plans. And I would raise also with you a positive story. In 2006, Catholic Relief Services started a microfinance program for IDPs in Khartoum using privately raised funds. And I would note parenthetically, I've written 2 laws on microfinance. I am an absolute fan of it. It is one of the best ways, dollar for dollar, of achieving maximum impact and building small clusters of economic growth and sustainability. The program in question, the one in Khartoum, has now grown to include over 3,000 women and is incorporating both a literacy and peace-building component. Women from different ethnic and religious backgrounds who previously had limited interaction get together weekly in small groups to help each other save and borrow money. Following their meetings, the women participate in a literacy class, and it's really one of those programs that is doing extraordinarily well, all with private funds. And I'm wondering, if that's something that you and USAID ought to be looking at to provide some assist to, expand it, and certainly in southern Sudan for the people who are displaced, obviously, and there are people who are in transition, certainly. This is something that you might be considering. Again, overarching question here is, are faith-based organizations going to be robustly included in planning?
Let me answer your question in general terms, and then on the specifics of this question, Representative Smith, let me have my team get back to you in detail. But on the general proposition, you'll get no argument from me about the role. I mean, so much of about the role of faith-based organizations in these kinds of activities. Anyone who does refugee resettlement in the United States knows the role of organizations that are connected to churches or synagogues or mosques, and whether it's CRS and the terrific work that people like the former Cardinal of Washington, Archbishop McCarrick, did and has done and continues to do. We value those relationships and we value those partners as a general proposition. In fact, I've spent some time overseas in our diplomacy with other governments who are much less willing to see the value of these organizations, explaining to those governments how and why relationships with organizations, faith-based organizations, can be so valuable and trying to allay misconceptions about what these organizations are trying to do when their goals are completely charitable and very laudatory. So that's our general perspective on the issue. But with respect to your specific question, let me get back to you in writing on that.
And finally, and I thank you, the Chairman, for this extra time. The issue, obviously, humanitarian aid cannot go forward without security protections. We've heard very disturbing reports, and I'm sure you have as well, about the influx of AK-47s to the tune of several 100,000, perhaps. Nobody knows the exact number. That China has not been helpful when it comes to breaking. It would appear it's all coming through China, maybe other sources as well. The arms embargo, and it has the feel, and God forbid that it has anything but just a feel, of the caches that were being stockpiled when General Dallaire sounded the alarm prior to the killing fields in Rwanda. And I'm wondering, what your sense is in terms of the potential for a quick and utterly destructive outbreak of violence. I've mentioned this and raised this with General Gratian several times. Others, I'm sure, have done it as well. But are we seeing a caching of arms and material that we should be concerned about? Could you respond to that?
I don't have a response to that question. And if I did, we might have to. If I did have the information in my head, I might have to ask to discuss it with you in closed session. But I just don't. What I will say is, I think there's enough information, out there, information to which Representative McGovern alluded, that gives, reasonable people good reason to be concerned about, the next several months, and I think makes it incumbent upon our government and other governments to be thinking about a range of scenarios, even as we drive toward, the kind of outcome that we all hope will evolve.
Do we know if President Obama raised with Prime Minister Wen in New York during the MGD summit last week China's lack of constructive role in Sudan? I mean, did they have a discussion about that? Do you know?
I don't have that information. We can come back to you on it.
Because as far as I can tell, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree, I mean, China has been the bad actor here. I've raised it. Who listens to me when I'm in Beijing?
I think you'd be surprised. But
my hope would be that it would be at the highest levels, because China, obviously, the killing fields that occurred in southern Sudan and then what continued in Darfur was enabled principally by China and Beijing's foreign policy of arming Bashir. And finally, I'll just say for the record, I've met with President Bashir. I had close to a 2-hour meeting with him. And frankly, I thought I was talking to Slobodan Milosevic, with whom I've had conversations, and a whole host of other bad actors. The trustworthiness is nil. So my hope is that we at least put pressure on his arms provider, and that is China.
And let me get back. We'll get back to you on this, because. But let me also say that as a general matter, these kinds of issues are very much the subjects of our discussions with the Chinese at very senior levels. But in terms of your specific question, let me get back to you on it.
Ms. Edwards.
Thank you very much. It's hard to know where to start, because I think I've been trying to figure out, at least for a couple of years now, and I put this question to Special Envoy Gratian several months ago, about where our leverage is with President Bashir, because I think I share the frustration of my colleagues. I share the frustration of Chairman McGovern that there have been so many pronouncements about the if you don't, then what? And so we had in March 29, the ICC issued the arrest warrant for President Bashir. Then after that announcement, the NGOs were expelled. Then in July this last year, there was a subsequent arrest warrant. and still a set of threats. But I don't know, if I were President Bashir, I'd say, a threat of what? And so I guess I'd like to ask you where you think a point of leverage is, and especially as we approach January 2011, and what is, I think, sure to be a situation that President Bashir is not going to be pleased with and a result. And I still don't understand then where the leverage of the international community would fall with respect to the protection of people and the insurance that there isn't greater violence and slaughter. Where is our leverage?
Let me, before I answer your question, let me start by saying, this really, I won't beg your question. I'll answer your question, but I will say that this is really a question which is really much more appropriately addressed to General Gratian and our negotiators, even Assistant Secretary Carson, than the guy in the government who does humanitarian affairs. But since I promised Jim that any question, Representative McGovern, that any question is okay, let me do my best by answering it. It seems to me that, the fact is, with respect to Sudan and with respect to any country in the world, our leverage is not unlimited. So the question is, how can we most effectively press our position? It seems to me in this instance that garnering the support of governments in the region, the international community more broadly, is absolutely critical, because to the extent that in this sort of a situation, the extent that a targeted government can play one country off against another, it diminishes our effect. So that's what the administration is trying to do, trying to build an international coalition of governments that are pressing on the issues surrounding the referendum. The prospect of enhanced relationships, greater trade and investment, the lifting of sanctions, conversely, the maintaining of sanctions, those are all the traditional instruments of leverage, which we're trying to bring to bear as most effectively as possible. If our leverage was unlimited, then we would know what the outcome is, but it's not, and we don't. I really, that's the best answer I can give you to the question, at least sitting in this perch. I would urge that you raise this question with my colleagues who deal much more directly with the political and security issues surrounding the referendum.
Let me just ask you this then: when, for example, an arrest warrant is issued, do you have some thought as to what the more immediate or direct impact is to on the refugee situation? I suppose there are circumstances under which something like that happens. It's a signal from the international community. It could have a positive impact on that community. You'd have a government that's responsive, that says, ooh, I get it. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. Maybe I'm reading that wrong.
Look, you've asked the most difficult question that you could have asked, especially, and you've asked it of somebody who's, and this issue is the subject of, this issue generally is the subject, as you probably know, of great debate between and within the humanitarian response community on the one hand, and the human rights community on the other hand. You happen to be talking to somebody who cut his teeth in the human rights community, and now has spent much of my career in the humanitarian community.